Thank you very much, Michelle. So what I'm going to do then is to go with a round, give you a little bit of time. Some of you might already have questions that you absolutely want to ask, but just have a thought before we open the discussion. Is there any question that you want to ask Michelle first? And if it's okay, I'm going to start with you, Katya. You're on my round. Is that all right?
I think one thing that might be missing is, I mean, Kate Raworth has in her book a graph with four components, and there is also the household. Um, and and I mean, this was not the topic of this talk, of course, but and the other thing is that um, there is a lot of unpaid work that goes into the markets, and there is a theory that whenever there is market logic, exchange logic, it will automatically lead to exploitation and uh, to accumulation of power and wealth and excluding others and um, what was the other thing? And also, yeah, this unstoppable growth, it will always need to grow. So if you have this market logic, then you will always arrive at all these things. And there's yeah, some maybe it's particularly German economists of a Marxist tradition or so. I've only come across this relatively recently, but it kind of makes sense to me. And they are advocating like more like a completely moneyless society, which is of course not possible. I can see that. But maybe to conclude my question, couldn't it be eventually, I mean, it would take a long, long transition, um, to have markets complementary to the commons rather than the other way around, and the state have it as a subsidiarity, like always have a real democracy at the most local level. So yes, I think that's my question.
That's really interesting, Katya. Thanks very much. Michelle, are you able to answer that one?
Um, I'm not exactly sure if I completely got the question, honestly. Because so the German economists that you're talking about, so are they saying are they primarily, based on sort of like Marxist traditions and so on? So that's where they're coming from. Because I think I'm a bit confused as to, and again, this is maybe also an interesting topic to go into in more detail. Like when we talk about markets, what exactly do we mean? I think the
Yes, yes,
term since
absolutely,
capitalism, right?
absolutely. Hmm.
Since capitalism over the last 400 years, but especially over the last, with global markets, and you have completely globalized capital that just moves around the globe, global
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
multinationals.
yeah, yeah.
Um, I think this has taken a completely different meaning, but actually markets have long preceded capitalism, right? I think you can find markets pretty much anywhere in the world, like dating, until before Christ. And I think there you didn't have those same dynamics that it would naturally, as claimed by the economists, sort of like devolve into those dynamics where you, at least that would be my immediate answer. So I think
Hmm.
it's not necessarily markets per se. It's like the underlying institutions and logic that govern today's markets, which in my view is very much driven not only by capitalism, but also the very design that we currently have about the monetary system, which itself is subordinated to those capitalist pressures, right? Um, that really creates more of these dynamics. But very curious to hear other people's opinion on that.
Hmm. Can I just
And just
say,
maybe very briefly about the household, I actually had that in my article. I just purposefully put a note there that I'm excluding it because of
yeah,
its naturally limited scale. But yeah, of course, there's four
yes, I remember
modes,
actually.
and the household being the most ancient and oldest institution. So absolutely.
Can I just say a quick thing about that? I think there is maybe a debate about that. Of course, I'm not an anthropologist or historian, but there are arguments for, like, for example, Mesopotamia also, or further than the Roman Empire and so on, also having developed some of these characteristics that we have today. And the other thing is that I think Karl Polanyi also says that. Yeah, exactly. There used to be markets, but they were part of the wider society, whereas now we have a situation where the market has become the thing that organizes everything else, you know. And that is also like, yeah, so the market logic has taken over basically. But yeah, the thing whether this doesn't necessarily always end up like that is debatable, of course. But there are some arguments for, yeah, maybe it often does end up like that. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Katja. Matthew, you're next in my round. Do you have a question for Michelle?
Thanks, Michelle, for your simple presentation of complex things. I'm always frustrated with the amount of attention given to theory when there's such a dearth of practice. Can you say something about how, in your work and maybe also in your theory, you would get to practice, or where your work has already met the practice?
That's a very interesting question, actually. Can you maybe further define in terms of like what aspects, like, because I used to be an academic, right? So naturally my work was pretty much not necessarily theoretical per se, because we did quite a lot of empirical studies, but it was more about observing what was happening around the world, rather than actually being directly involved. Now, personally speaking, just over the last 2 or 3 years, I've been spending quite a lot of time of diving into alternative financial models and currencies, to really, again, mostly in theory for now, to really develop some of the key characteristics of some of these models, see how they could be blended, and actually come to a place where you could develop a sort of framework that would allow you to decide, given a specific context in place, with specific preconditions being there, what model would be most effective in order to deliver certain outcomes that would be desired by that particular community. In terms of more practice, well, thanks to meeting Sue, Katja, and a few others, especially in Stroud or around Stroud, I'm now involved in a sort of new project called the Commons Lab, where really the idea being was that we help develop new commons, or actually communicate communities to develop their own commons, and build replicable models so that other communities can relatively easily replicate successful pilot projects. And one of the key components of that is that how do you enable the communities to self-fund, and if that's not possible, to create structures that actually attract funding from aligned investors, but in a way that protects the shared resources so that they cannot or will never be commodified again. And so that, to me, necessitates or makes it clear that those communities or the resources can never be financed using traditional debt or equity. So one of the interesting mechanisms, of course, Chris's UCO concept, and there's a few others. So I guess in terms of the actual practice, so to answer your question, we're getting there slowly.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Hans Florian, you're the next in the round. Do you have a question?
Thank you, Michelle. I don't have a question because it was quite clear what you told, and there was very much resonance in me on what you said. Um, uh, although I have a kind of a different perspective, there are many perspectives valuable to looking at the health and not the wealth of the society. I very much agreed with that formulation. Um, and my perspective is more like coming from anthroposophy, where the human being is in the center, and everything what is around the human being is derived from the human being. And also from Joseph Beuys, the artist who says everybody is an artist, on the social sculpture. So it's a different perspective, but it's the same goal we are aiming at. It's a question of discussion. I think we have to tame two of the ones you mentioned. We have to tame the markets, and we have to tame the state. And I think the commons are a good way, a good actor who can do it. And so we must enforce the idea to do it. No? And you talked about re-embedding. This is exactly the right topic. We have to re-embed something which has been taken out, abstracted from where humans are. It's only money and markets, and we have to put it back. And I think money is a good point to start there, because everybody needs money. Everybody starts to listen if you talk to them. And I think, Katja, a moneyless society is possible, but the money, it's an exchange moneyless society. We need a dividend society. This is not an exchange token which goes on and on and on, but it's a dividend like a stamp or like a train ticket or whatever, which can only be used once. And if you start, the more we start to organize the real economy, what we need to live according to this dividend, the better we come into the near of the essence of society. Yeah, and let me have a look what I noted down. You mentioned Bowen's point that the commons always come in times of need and start to repair, and when the normal market activities run again, the commons are drowned again, and we have to bring resistance against that. And I put the note in the chat that we maybe should look for the grand unifying theory for Wörgl, the Swiss Wehrbank, the Chiemgauer, and the Sardex. What would that be? I started to use the large text models. I don't call them artificial intelligence. I call them an echo of the large text, not even large language. I call it large text models, and it's very interesting what you get when you prompt them. What the existing text can be generated comparing these four. Have a try to do it. Okay, that's my point. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans Freund. Do you want to reply, Michelle, or shall we go on?
No, thank you very much for sharing a lot of different, very interesting ideas. So I'll take a few notes, and I need to investigate some of these further, especially the dividend society. Do you have like any, is that related to the twin token approach? Or is that something else? Is there like any resource I could...
the twin token is not yet dividend. The dividend comes in when you talk about basic income. Then if you took a look at the division of labor, and the consequences which need to implement the total implementation of division of labor. And in my point of view, there is a dividend which gets everybody by simply belonging to a society, to a community, by belonging. This is the per capita, and he should get what everybody else needs again and again.
Thanks very much. Anne, you're next on. Do you have a question at all or a comment?
A lot of reflection. I don't know if it's so much a question. Also a reflection of what Matt was saying. If you look at complex reality as a flow rather than, or systems as living systems, flowing systems, energy systems rather than as structures, you come up with different, state and market and commons are not separate domains so much as different kinds of flows. And so what I see happening today is that more and more companies, understanding that, on a dead planet, there is no economy, they're starting to serve the common good rather than exploiting it or extracting it. They're trying to regenerate it, but they're still companies. And so the big issue now is, what we call Horizon 1 is the extractive model. Horizon 3 is the regenerative one, but it's a leap from one to the next. And since the current money system is the only one that you can pay your taxes with, so to speak, everybody's a bit in a double bind. And so this is Horizon 2. And so this is what I'm focusing on. Like, how can I get more and more people to understand that, if we all together decide that we need a new money system in democratic society, even companies, steward ownership, cooperations, all these things are happening, but we need to join forces so that we have like a democratic critical mass, so that money again serves the collective goals. And then the state is just at a different fractal level. You have companies, you have communities or commons, and then you have states, but they're all serving the same goal, and they just have different means of efficiency or of dependency, as Ulana would call it. So it's not so much a question, it's more like, I don't know, maybe a suggestion to look also, what Matt was saying, in practice, things are already shifting in towards restoring. So, and the shift, or blurring the boundaries. There's a community here in Belgium where they established a new company. It's a cooperative company, and the owners are partly companies, partly the community, and partly citizens. So they balance each other. As soon as one, starts to drift away, and one, I don't know, private cars rather than shared cars, the other two are there to install balancing feedback loops. And so it's like a perfect example of turning money around. A company, it's a cooperative company, but just turning money around and bringing all the profits back into the commons. So it is happening. It's already shifting. And this company is saying, well, we don't understand why not everybody's doing that. So they're now spreading the word towards other communities. But it's the communities, it's like the central level, they bring together the micro level companies in this ecosystem. And then, of course, it would be great if they could also get legal support, because now the law is saying, a company has to, the goal of company is to produce a profit for the shareholders. And the other ones are like, sort of like, I don't know, they're interest-free or uninterested or something like that. So the legislation also has to shift the state. But that's it. That's all I wanted to comment on.
Thank you very much, Anne. Do you want a response at all, Michelle, or shall we continue?
No, I just want to say thank you for sharing your reflection. I also just seeing in the chat that you've suggested a few books. So thank you for that. I'll definitely have a look as well.
Okay, so Chris, I'm sorry you're almost the last one. Do you have a question or comment for Michelle?
Well, I mean, I could be here all afternoon. Thank you for that, Michelle. Extremely concise, clear. I take the view that the states and markets as we know them will wither on the vine, because I'm quite clear now, after spending maybe 15 years working on it, that it's completely possible to create a fully mutual, let's call it that, economy based on mutual risk, cost, surplus, shared savings, control, just mutual agreements. And the reason why people would adopt those agreements is that they outcompete the existing agreements, and that the form of capitalism we've come to know will be outcompeted, which I quite like the idea of that. The ability to make smart savings, this is the key point, the ability to make smart savings and shared savings. My focus on that, as people will know, has been on smart energy savings, my background being in energy, because that's something that everyone has to have. The use of energy defines a residential community. You can't live somewhere without using energy. But we've reached a tipping point in global markets, in my opinion. As Michael Hudson says, if something can't be paid, it won't be paid. And there is a limit to how much people can pay for energy. People talk about $100, $200, $1,000 a barrel. Sorry, ain't going to happen, because people simply cannot afford to pay more than there's a limit to what people can pay for energy. So we're seeing a sort of immovable object of what I call peak rent, okay, which is what the demands of the producers. That's an immovable object. But you've also got an irresistible force, which is that all of the easy to find energy resources have been found and are being exploited. So what you're getting is the middlemen, and this is the entire point about what's been happening. And I put a link there with my analysis 20 odd years ago, that the market paradigm of the basically market 1.0 is when people are physically present in the market, and that exists and has always existed. And then you've got the market presence through an intermediary, which in my opinion, we're approaching the end of. And then where we're going to go is into market 3.0, which is where you've got network presence. And everything I've been doing all this time has been looking at, well, what does the legal and financial architecture of this network market look like? And in my opinion, now after all this time, it's a smart market. It's a smart market in services. It's where the deployment of what's between our ears, the use of, is swapped for resource savings made at the retail price. And that's not new. It's been around since 1778. And I use the example of James Watt's business model as an example of that. And in my view, the colossal growth of economic growth in IP, in smart ideas, and the reason I'm so optimistic about the future is that in the past, you could keep people out of land with guns. You could keep them out of factories and fields with guns. But if I give you an idea or a way of doing things, I can't take it back. And that is what's going on now. And if these concepts of this is how you mobilize to build something, this is how you mobilize to do something, this is how you mobilize to give each other purchasing power, there's nothing anybody can do to stop it if we actually make sure that we have the right communications infrastructure, for instance. Not that straightforward, but doable. So I'm a huge optimist on the basis of looking forward that we've reached a tipping point. We cannot afford, the world cannot afford what the rent seekers think they can afford. And I believe that the battle, if you like, or the struggle is already pretty much won. And that what we can do, and it's only through doing pilots on a small scale in islands and then networking and linking them up, this, I think, is the way of the future. And I think the people gathered here and the people that we're working together have come together for a reason, which is that we don't subscribe to the normal rules. And therefore, we can actually go ahead and do something about it. And I say this from a background at global level, the highest global level of government, to the lowest, most granular agreements between people and sorting out a house and things like this. And it's, I'm hugely optimistic as to the future. And in the last few months or so, I've just realized that, well, it's about time I stopped thinking the unthinkable, which is what I've been doing, and that we got together and started doing the undoable. So that's essentially where I'm at. So I'll leave it at that. Bit of a ramble, but more. And thanks, Michelle, for stimulating that rant.
Thanks very much, Chris, for that. Michelle, do you want to make a comment before I continue? Okay, thanks. So my question, in a way, is, although I'm supposed to facilitate this, I'm going to take part in this as well, is looking at my experiences, I suppose, at a community level. And what I'm very aware of is that we have almost idyllic flavor around commons, because I'm in the moment in Brixton trying to develop community networks. And what I'm finding is that one of the difficulties is that you can have the most beautiful idea of a system, but actually the system is created with people, by people, for people. And so it basically came up for me probably about 3 or 4 days ago when something came on the internet about scaling. People talk about scaling up or scaling out, and this was talking about scaling deeply. And what it was suggesting is that you look at people, and this for me is what's happening in commons or commoning. For me, I think it's important to use the word, not we create commons like we create a market, but we create commoning as a way of being, living, working, being with each other. And the difficulty is that what I experience is people kind of I go to an organization or something, oh no, we do this. No, we don't want anyone in. No, they're the people that do that. So actually, once again, you're ending up creating silos. And somehow we need to work with people, because unless people begin to basically feel like they are worthy of being listened to, of being taken into account, of actually enabling something, then they're waiting for mummy and daddy or the state or the government or the corporates or, I don't know, the social media influence to tell them what to do. And I wonder how it's possible for us to support and enable people to actually take agency for themselves, to create what they want, and particularly to work out what it is that they want in commoning, in a sense. So I've just added to the comments rather than asking a question, although I would like to ask you that, Michelle. But given that we've now got about half an hour left, about 30 minutes left, let's explore also not only what we've been looking at, but also your questions as well. And would you like to take that, Michelle, so that you start with where you are with it and which question you'd like us to look at?
I think the one I'd be most interested in, like staying for the broader topic or sort of like the starting, point of today's session is really like in your particular domain where you're working on. And as I understand, we all do work primarily in sort of like money, finance related things, but probably like on very different angles. Like, what are some of the interesting either existing collaborations or synergies that you can see between those 3 modes, or let's say 2 modes or 3 modes, whatever, or where could such a collaboration really turbocharge things? So make things a lot more effective, let's say.
Okay, would someone like to comment on that?
Maybe I jump in. My main obstacle is that there is not yet any community which tried out Twin Token, and the issuing of the not only the clearing and settling, but also the issuing of tokens for the circulation, except 3 groups near Lake Victoria in Africa. And they sent me data, and they really could save liquidity when they started with it. But it's too much to do it from Germany. I can only write, and then they have to understand it, and somebody has to go up behind it. And this is the main obstacle, is that we are so separated as households and individuals from each other, that we don't have enough coherence compared to the coherence of the banks and their clearing systems. This is a 100% coherent system, and they do it since 250 years, and they earn money with it and let us pay it. And this is what makes me angry, that we could do it in civil society and save the money for ourselves. But in our northern communities, maybe not in Latin America, but in our and in Africa, but in our northern communities, we are so separated. There is no such thing like society, only individuals. This is what we all believe, and what keeps us in the exchange economy.
That's a really interesting point, and certainly this side of the planet have moved so that what we value is being individual, being independent, rather than how do we work interdependently. Michelle, would you like to ask, or would anyone else like to follow on? Matthew, did you want to? You're muted, Matthew.
Thank you. On the subject of collaboration, for me, it always comes down to the question of what can I do for you and what can you do for me? Both questions asked equally, of course. And in the language of community currencies, that means obviously within any currency group, you assume there is collaboration already going on. So the level of collaboration that I've been interested in for a long time, and that Credit Commons was all about, is what can one community do for another community? And it seems that very few people are asking this question. And I still think it's important, although I now understand that it might be in general too early to ask that question, because what we find is that within individual communities, there's not very much going on that could be exported, for example.
When you say exported, what do you mean?
Well, literally the exporting of goods and services, and likewise importing, because it's always reciprocal. But if you look at a typical Let's group, which might have 80 members and 10 or less really active members, there's not much scope in that for looking outwards. There needs to be much more going on internally before I would ask a community to look outwards more. And so the obstacles then to collaboration are the lack of collaboration itself. And I blame myself for this as well. I've been talking about this for approaching 20 years, but I don't find a lot of scope in my life for asking people in my suburb, because I live in a suburb at the moment, to help me with things. and I haven't found a lot of time to help other people. This is changing when I'm moving to the countryside. I'm really putting this central now and looking to build relationships with cooperative neighbors and share stuff. But it didn't feel natural for me. Of course, I'm dreadfully antisocial in general, but living in a place temporarily, as many of us do, and also living in a city where we're all closed into little boxes, we don't have any land to work with. Land is a great basis for cooperation, I think, and all the things you can do on it. So cooperation, at least at the neighborly level, has never really felt appropriate for me in as a nomad and in an urban lifestyle.
Thank you
Does that
very
add
much.
anything for you, Michelle?
That really is a beautiful explanation, and thank you so much for sharing that, Matthew. Do you want to make a
Confession, isn't it?
Do you want to make a comment, Michelle?
You should definitely come here to Colombia because I'm a nomad as well. But here, the neighborhood sort of like dynamics are very different. Although there's still no land to share, in a sense. But there's definitely a lot more of yeah, sort of like reciprocity going on. And it's very, very easy to sort of like get into contact with people. Again, it's just like more of these informal sort of like social networks and relationships. But they're not sort of like formalized or tracked. Not necessarily that that needs to be the case, but I think if again we talk about lead systems and so on, there needs to be some way of memory, right? Of sort of like recording going on so that you can go beyond your local sort of like block or small neighborhood. But maybe actually that got me into thinking when you said, well, maybe not at the let's level, but let's say if you talk about things like SARDEX, about really more business to business BARD exchanges. I think one of the issue always is that either you have a big hub that sort of like acts as a sink, so that accumulates large balances that it cannot spend because there's not an sufficient, let's say, market for them to spend those credits locally. If you could actually incorporate things like, again, the public sector, so if we zoom out of the different modes, right? So if there's maybe another company that you could bring into that network so that it could act as a sort of balancing mechanism, or if that's not possible, try to bring in something like
It looks like Michelle's frozen just a little bit.
So could I make my apologies? I have to jump to another one.
Okay. Thanks very much, Chris, for being present, and your rant was wonderful.
Well,
thanks, Chris.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. Michelle, we've got you back again.
Bye for now, guys.
Bye, Chris.
Oh yeah, bye. Sorry, I don't know where it cut off. But what I was saying is like to experiment with modes where you can have local governments come in, right? So that the government which is generally a source of credits flowing towards it, so that governments or big supermarkets, big sort of like local companies still, but that act as normal things, that you could incorporate them into those systems. And so in the case, for example, of a local supermarket, well, it would itself act as a balancing mechanism if it were allowed to create vouchers that were backed by those accumulated credit balances. And so that way you actually expand a purely B2B system that's based on mutual credit, where you actually expand it towards also a B2C network where through that one thing, that big supermarket, for example, you let them issue tradable, exchangeable vouchers that then get put into circulation, that are being used by local citizens that, again, go shopping into all these different local businesses. And so it naturally flows back to that previous sink, the big supermarket, which then could retire that money. So I think there's like various models where, again, zooming out a bit, if the communities themselves don't manage to create that reciprocity at a level that's necessary to sustain collaboration, well, then maybe look at the other two modes. Are there like companies, corporations that we could bring in? Are there local municipalities or governments that we could bring in order to play that role and act as a sort of like balancing mechanism, either across communities or within a broader group? But does that make sense?
Yes, but I'd also like to add in the kind of power dynamics. And I'm thinking, for instance, from my experience here in Brixton, where the way in which the Brixton Local Exchange and Trade Scheme was managed, or how it worked, were several things. Is partly that the people who over-earned were valued more than the people who overspent. And yet, when you have a zero accountancy system, the over-earners are as challenging as the overspenders in that way. But it was fascinating watching how people talked about them or talked to them and the different way in which it was perceived, and that the over-earners were actually causing damage and yet believing that they're wonderful. And then it was also about when I was doing some brokering with them, and I'd say, oh, look, 20 minutes down the road, there's someone offering what it is you want. They say, oh, but you mean I've got to travel 20 minutes to get it? So it's people and how we perceive it. And we learn a lot of that from valuing. I mean, we come in with this part, the prefrontal cortex, with almost no wiring in there. We're wired by our early relationships and the way in which we learn. And very rarely are we actively enabled to learn how money is created. Normally, young children say, oh, mummy and daddy get it out the bank or off the computer or whatever, which sounds very funny, but actually it's serious that people do not know. In fact, when I was trying to help them to learn in the 90s, some of them used to get very angry at me, lying that the banks created money out of nothing. They were going to complain about me and so on, until, finally the bank said, we do that. So it's about how do you help people to connect in a way. And we had literally this summertime, we were paid in order to do some local community work in order to help manage the heat with resilience. And initially the council were interviewing local organizations to see which organization should do it. The organization said, don't interview us, we'll work together. We'll work out how we do this. And as a result of that, as a part of the participatory research, they got something like 300 people surveyed. And the previous 2 years, which they'd been paid to do this, the maximum survey they got was 30. And the person from the council who was responsible for it and enabled it to happen eventually said, it's not like the consultancy I used to do. It's completely different. People are really different when you go down to a community level. So it's somehow helping people to relearn about how you achieve what it is that you're looking for, rather than looking down on them and trying to get bits of information. I don't know if I've explained that particularly well, but it's somehow, how do we enable people to work with that? Hans Florian, thank you.
You talked about over-earners and overspenders. And just think a minute. If somebody in a village where they only have a real economy, the one who serves the most with the things they need would be the richest.
Yeah.
And it is fine to pay him. So but now comes the point where we should look at the consequences of the kind of money we use. We use the Pacioli protocol money, debit, credit. It can only come in pairs, in twins, but one twin is bunkered in the bank. So we have this instrument of Pacioli protocol where a single person can find out whom do I owe and who owes me, and what is the effect on my till or my bank account. So it's a kind of an egoistic instrument, controlling instrument. And if we agglomerate all these into a controlling matrix, then we come to the point where in Zardex they said, why don't you spend the money in Sardinia? Because there is no one, and so let's change it. So money becomes a controlling instrument. And if you think about money as a dividend, as the right to participate in what others contributed, then if you pay a price, then the money is not an exchange thing. The money, the right to participate, becomes on the other side of the price. When it comes to the production side, becomes a means of controlling what has been bought, what is needed. So it's not there is no more exchange in there, and that would be a levitation of the concept of money, which is no longer stones made to bread. To bring in a kind of a spiritual perspective.
That's really interesting. I mean, I will have to take that in a bit, but what it triggers for me is remembering when I was working in Egypt in different times, that once I was out of the tourist area, nothing cost anything. It was, do you want to buy? Do you want to sell? And then you negotiate. And I'm kind of wondering how that relates to what you're saying. I need to take some time to take that in and process it.